Old sister, the business must grow beyond your limited talents. Smiling at the termination papers over the mahogany desk, Dylan said. I picked up the document steadily and said, "Time to make room for real innovation." I kept my expression neutral, which had become second nature after 15 years of corporate politics. I briefly made eye contact with my younger brother. Behind him were elegantly framed family portraits, relics of a purported tradition of loyalty, which stood in stark contrast to his victorious grin. At 44, I was Vanessa King, and I had dedicated a third of my life to creating and overseeing the in-house software system that drove Kingline Ventures, our family's Pittsburgh-based logistics and inventory company. In addition to being the IT lead, I was the one who created the entire system from the ground up, writing countless lines of code to build a framework that monitored vendors across 3 continents, controlled shipments in real time, and automated payment. I tapped the termination documents on the table to straighten their edges and asked, "Is this really how you want to start your tenure as managing director?" Making drastic adjustments after just 1 week in the large workplace. Dylan reclined in our father's chair, which still had the feel of our father's dominant presence even after it had been reupholstered twice. Dylan, however, had always acted impulsively and egotistically, in contrast to our father, whose choices were moderated by experience and thought. "The board agrees we need fresh perspectives," he said, tying his silk tail. I nearly chuckled when he used the word homemade, as if I had been knitting scarves rather than creating an integrated logistics framework that had saved the company millions of dollars and outperformed every commercial option. They've approved bringing in Vortex Solutions to overhaul our digital infrastructure. Their team will modernize everything: machine learning, cloud integration, the works. Things I've been advocating for years while you've kept us tethered to your homemade system. However, I never corrected him. Assuming that my art would speak for itself was possibly my worst error over the years. Dylan went on, "You have 2 weeks of severance." As I got up from my chair, I saw my brother already glancing past me at his computer screen and continuing on. "Human Resources has already processed everything. Your credentials will remain active until the end of the day tomorrow to tie up any loose ends." I smiled a little. Not in acceptance, but in comprehension. But he didn't notice it. It would soon become painfully clear that Dylan had never bothered to understand what I truly did at Kingline Ventures. It wasn't easy growing up as the Pittsburgh Kings. From a 2-truck business, our father, Edward King, transformed Kingline Ventures into a regional powerhouse that managed logistics for firms throughout the Rust Belt. We occupied a large Victorian home in Shadyside, a world of country club memberships and privileged schools. Dylan was at sports and wooing people at business dinners, but I was more interested in math and computers. When I was 12, my father purchased my first computer because he could see I had an analytical mind. I began developing simple inventory tracking software at the age of 16. He immediately brought me into the family firm once I received my degree in computer technology. He informed me, "One day the world will run on information more than steel," exhibiting an unusual foresight for someone who had made his money on tangible utilities. "You'll help us stay ahead of that curve." When our costly third-party logistics software malfunctioned during a significant client onboarding, I made my first significant contribution. After 3 restless nights, I came up with a temporary solution that out to be more effective than the original setup. Dad gave me the go-ahead to create a comprehensive proprietary system at that point. "Build something just for us," he stated. "Something that fits exactly how we work." I achieved just that throughout the course of the following 10 years, adding specialized modules, specially created APIs, and blazing fast routing algorithms to support our expanding company. We were able to undercut rivals while keeping larger profit margins thanks to the technology, which turned into our competitive advantage. However, my role as the system's creator was more assumed as it became vital. Dylan, on the other hand, came back from business school with ambitious ideas about digital transformation and disruption. During board meetings, he criticized my work as legacy technology and suggested partnering with glitzy digital firms instead. Our father always acted as a mediator, acknowledging the value of Dylan's idea, but also valuing the dependability of what I had constructed. During our frequent coffee dates, Dad would say to me, "Your brother sees the future, but you've built our present. Both matter." After that, Dad abruptly announced his retirement, which was sped up by minor cardiac problems. Although it hurt, I wasn't shocked by the board's decision to appoint Dylan as managing director, along with a vision that sounded thrilling. To members who were unaware of the technical challenges involved, he has the charisma and contacts that I did not. I was taken aback by how fast he dismantled what I had constructed. More than just a personal rejection, the termination documents in my possession revealed a basic ignorance of how intricately my code was integrated into the business's processes. That afternoon, I methodically emptied my desk, putting 15 years of work life into a single cardboard box. The little personal belongings I had, a modest collection of tech conference lanyards, framed pictures of hiking excursions, and a potted succulent, did not seem to adequately capture my time at Kingline. Human resources. Jennifer hovered awkwardly, close by, making sure I didn't steal anything from the company. Anything on my way out, even property or sabotage. She had only been with the company 6 months and was obviously uncomfortable evicting someone who had worked here for longer than most of the staff. She said, "I'm sorry about this, Vanessa," slowly. However, we both knew it wasn't. "Everyone in it is shocked. It's business," I said. It was intimate, the result of a sibling conflict that had at last been settled. I took one final look at my computer screen. The dashboard for the Kingline Integrated System, or KISS as the team nicknamed it, was open on it. With its color-coded inventory levels across warehouses, real-time shipment status updates for hundreds of shipments, and up-to-date financial estimates, the interface was surprisingly straightforward. The intricacy that lay beneath the unique architecture that I had created, preserved, and enhanced throughout the years, was hidden. I had 24 hours to what to do with the information in my thoughts that wasn't recorded anyplace else before my credentials were canceled. "According to protocol, I must request your master password override," Jennifer stated, quoting her offboarding checklist. I grinned a little. "It's in the system documentation. Dylan has access to all that." Wasn't totally accurate, though. Although there was some basic documentation, the deeper architecture, workarounds, shortcuts, and contingency protocols were all kept in my private notes and in my head, and weren't included in the official documentation. Not because of malice or concerns about losing one's job, but rather because documentation always falls behind reality, and complicated systems change naturally. I passed the glass-walled conference room where Dylan was meeting with Vortex Solutions officials as I made my way to the elevator with my little box of stuff. I could see him making excited gestures through the glass as a group of experts nodded in agreement. The wall screen showed their slick presentation. I was drawn to the slide that showed the smooth transition from legacy systems. I nearly stopped, to explain to them that integrating with KISS was not smooth, and that the system was purposefully built with security levels that needed to be navigated with specialized knowledge. I nearly alerted them to the cascading dependencies that, if changed improperly, may result in disastrous failures. Nearly. Rather, I entered the elevator and hit the button in the lobby. I had always been too professional to introduce booby traps or backdoors into the system. Nothing needed to be sabotaged by me. If handled improperly, the system itself, with all of its adaptability and complexity, would do that for me. I felt lighter than I have in years as the elevator doors closed. There was a strange, unknown calm for 3 days. I had time that I hadn't had since college, free from the stress of system maintenance and the incessant ping of crisis emails. I slept beyond 6 in the morning and headed for M. On the way to the office, I actually sat down for breakfast rather than guzzling coffee and ran in the morning along the Monongahela River. My personal phone vibrated when I was having a leisurely cup of coffee on my balcony on the 3rd morning following my termination. Joe, the head of client services at Kingline and one of the few co-workers I name, flash on the screen. "Vanessa," she said with a distinct hint of panic in her voice. "Are you watching this?" "Watching what?" she interrupted, and I could hear background noise. "The Westbridge presentation. Dylan's doing it live on the company feed for all departments to see. He's about to," she said. "Oh God, it's happening again." I used the credentials, which apparently hadn't been deactivated yet, to access the company's internal live broadcast on my tablet. Dylan stood in front of officials from Westbridge Manufacturing, a prospective client worth at least $15 million a year, in our largest conference room, which was captured on camera. In the middle of his statement, he confidently pointed to the enormous screen behind him that displayed the KISS dashboard, which enables us to guarantee 99.8% on-time delivery and total transparency across your supply chain. Then it took place. Behind him, a series of error messages flashed on the dashboard before it abruptly froze. Dylan spoke for a few more seconds before he realized something was amiss. His professional smile wavered as he looked back. "Just a momentary glitch," he said, tapping his tablet quickly. When I said, "Let me just refresh the system failed to do so. It showed the serious error notice, database integrity compromised, system lockdown initiated, instead. I was fully aware of what had occurred. Years ago, I had put in place a self-protection strategy for the KISS when a faulty update almost erased our shipping data. To avoid catastrophic loss, it would automatically lock down when it recognized any data corruption. Up until now, only I have carried out the particular command sequence and administrator verification needed to restart." Dylan was still struggling to regain his self-assured manner, and he was falling apart. "Our technical team will have this resolved momentarily," he promised the Westbridge executives, who were becoming more and more doubtful. Operations managers, IT personnel, and eventually Dylan himself started bombarding my phone with calls and texts. I turned it off and kept watching the catastrophe play out. Within minutes, the company's message system's emergency channel was inundated with reports. The billing system was frozen, shipping labels could not be generated, and warehouse terminals were offline. The whole enterprise had come to a complete stop. My stomach was filled with a horrible satisfaction, which was quickly followed by guilt. These were still my co-workers who were having difficulties for no apparent reason. Dylan was the only one who deserved this humiliation. The other clients had done nothing wrong. When my phone rang again, Edward was on the screen. I paused. Then, said Vanessa. He sounded worn out and anxious rather than with his customary authoritative presence. The system's down, I answered. I know. I'm watching it happen. Dylan says it's a systematic failure, that your architecture was fundamentally flawed and finally collapsed. I cracked up. He would say that, of course. The system is defending itself against anything they are attempting to do to it. It is not defective. We were silent for a long time before my father spoke again. The question hovered in the air. Can you fix it? Could I? Of course. Would I? That was more difficult. When I eventually said, I don't work for King Line anymore, Dad, my father sighed deeply over the phone. Dylan made that very clear. The shame I had previously had grew more when I was told, this isn't just about you and Dylan, Vanessa. There are 300 employees whose jobs depend on getting things running again, not to mention our clients. He was correct. Many innocent individuals were sacrificed in order for me to feel satisfied with Dylan's situation. However, the wounded part of me, the part that had been rejected after 15 years of hard work, was unwilling to give up. Dylan should have thought about that before firing the only person who fully understands the system, I responded. Vanessa, my father began, but I cut him off. Besides, he has Vortex Solutions now. Aren't they supposed to be modernizing everything? I wasn't totally lying when I said, I'm sorry, Dad. I have a job interview in an hour. I have to go. In fact, I had an interview that morning with Caraval Logistics, a mid-size rival that had contacted me nearly immediately after the industry learned of my departure from King Line. For years, their CTO had been attempting to steal me. I couldn't resist watching the King Line emergency channel one more time while getting ready for the interview. Things were getting worse. Trucks were sitting idle, drivers were awaiting orders, and warehouses were unable to process arriving or leaving supplies, according to regional managers. The disruption is expected to cost $50,000 per hour and more, according to conservative estimates. Everything about my interview with Caraval went really nicely. Their technical staff genuinely cared about my approach to logistics software and posed insightful questions on system architecture. Lawrence Bennett, the CTO, was clearly excited about the possibility of having me create something for them. As he led me out, he continued, We've been trapped in vendor solutions for too long. Having someone in-house who could create something tailored to our needs would be revolutionary. Someone like you mean? I replied with a grin. He handed me a folder and said, just like you. I almost gasped when I opened the folder in my car. This is our offer. It's aggressive. We want you to know how serious we are. Take a few days to think about it. In addition to significant ownership and the title of chief, the salary package was nearly double what I had been earning at King Line. I had never received it at the family business, but it was everything I earned as a technology officer. I still had a ton of King Line messages on my phone. I quickly skimmed through them, seeing board members contacting me directly, the IT team pleading for access codes, and Dylan insisting that I accept his calls. I was drawn to Caitlin Westbridge's final message, which read, Dylan is publicly blaming you, saying you sabotaged the system before leaving. Board emergency meeting in progress. Please call me. Anger shot through me. Sabotage? I had built and safeguarded the system for 15 years. Its present failure was straightforward. The lockdown sequence was probably started by the Vortex team's attempt to compel integration without fully comprehending the security measures. I gave Dylan a call before I changed my mind. He responded right away. Thank God. You need to fix this right now, Vanessa. This is corporate sabotage, and I'm prepared to take legal action. Stop, I interrupted him. I didn't sabotage anything. Your fancy consultants triggered a security protocol by trying to force access. If you'd bothered to ask me for a proper handover instead of ambushing me with termination papers, I could have explained how the system works. Then fix it. He asked. Now, that's not how this works, Dylan. I'm not your employee anymore. Remember? You made that abundantly clear. After a moment of astonished silence, he spoke again in a surprisingly accommodative tone. What do you want to come back? Fine, you can have your job back. I couldn't contain my laughter. My job back? After you humiliated me and questioned my capabilities? I don't think so. The situation at Kingline had gotten to the point of catastrophe by evening. I found out from Caitlin that Dylan was having trouble explaining the system failure and his decision to, without a transition plan when the board held an emergency meeting. The Vortex Solutions team acknowledged that without the necessary documentation, which was absent from the official repository, they were unable to access the fundamental system design. While sipping a glass of wine in my living room, I considered my alternatives. The promise of a fresh start, a clean slate, and acknowledgement I had never experienced at Kingline made the Caravel offer alluring. However, I spent 15 years of my life with Kiss. It was like witnessing the dismantling of a piece of myself as I saw it come apart. On the evening of 9, my doorbell rang. I could see Dylan standing there looking unkempt through the peephole. His fine suit was creased, and his normally flawless hair was mussed. I hesitated for a second before opening the door. Before I could say anything, he responded. You win, okay? I was wrong. We need you. I need you. I studied my younger brother while leaning against the doorframe. Dylan was 40 years old and still exuded the arrogant assurance of the golden child. The son who had flawlessly followed in his father's footsteps while I blazed my own technical trail. Now, eyes for the first time. The board is incensed. He went on. When I didn't respond, they're talking about emergency leadership changes. Dad is disappointed. Everyone's blaming me, as they should. I responded quietly. You fired the architect of the system that runs the entire company without ensuring knowledge transfer. That's not just business. It's negligent leadership. He hesitated before continuing. I backed and motioned for him to come into my living room. Tell me what you want. Name your price to fix this. I took out my laptop and opened the offer letter from Caravel. I turned the screen in his direction and stated, Caravel wants me to build them exactly what I built for Kingline. When Dylan viewed the settlement package, his eyes opened, and he said, This is what they think I'm worth. This is outrageous. They're just trying to steal our technology through you. I shut down the laptop and said, No, Dylan. They're recognizing my value, something Kingline never did. Just an IT manager anymore. I want my role to reflect what I actually contribute. What are you saying? I want a board seat and the title of Chief Technology Officer, equal compensation to yours, and complete autonomy over the technical division. I looked him in the eye. Those are my terms. Dylan gave a disbelieving laugh. You can't be serious. The board would never. Then enjoy explaining to them how you plan to rebuild 15 years of proprietary development from scratch, I said. There was a tense hush as my brother took in the situation. I'm sure the shareholders will understand. When the stock plummets. I could practically see the calculations going on behind his eyes, balancing his pride with the urgency of the situation and his long-term prospects in the event that Kingline experienced a protracted outage. When he eventually said, The board meets again tomorrow morning. I'll present your terms, but I can't guarantee they'll accept everything." "That's fine," I responded, "but I won't step foot in the office or touch a line of code until they do. The system will remain down until then." I poured myself another glass of wine and went out onto my balcony after Dylan had left. For the first time in years, I felt like I had complete control over my future, as the Pittsburgh skyline glistened against the night sky. Regardless of whether I accepted Caravel's offer or went back to Kingline on my own terms, I knew that I would never again let my contributions be undervalued or taken for granted. I wore a fitted power suit that I had bought, but hardly ever wore when I arrived at Kingline's offices the following morning. As I walked across the lobby, the receptionist's eyes widened and whispers began to follow. Clearly, word had gotten out about my homecoming. As I walked in, the boardroom became quiet. As I sat down at the table, 12 sets of eyes followed me. I was seated in a nice leather chair between my father and our longest-serving board member, Josephine Winters, rather than in my typical chair against the wall as an invited technical consultant. At the head of the table was Dylan. A projection behind him showed the ongoing system outage figures, which included 27 hours of unavailability, anticipated losses of nearly 1.4 million, 42 delayed shipments, and 17 irate client escalations, as if he had aged years overnight. Dylan said, "Ms. King has agreed to address our technical situation in a carefully modulated manner. The board has reviewed and accepted her conditions for return." He deviated from the decision with the modest but telling choice. I noted the formal Ms. King rather than my sister, or Vanessa. A few of the board members gave me grateful nods, while others observed with fatigue, possibly questioning whether I had intentionally sparked the situation. "Before we proceed," I said, as I opened my computer, "I want to be clear about what happened. The system failure wasn't sabotage or poor design. It was a security protocol I implemented years ago to prevent data corruption. When unauthorized access attempts triggered it, the system did exactly what it was programmed to do: protect itself. None of them had ever seen the Kai's master interface until I projected my screen onto it. A sophisticated mesh of security procedures, override methods, and system health indicators lies behind the slick user display. What you're seeing is the true heart of King's competitive advantage," I said. "A proprietary system that's been customized and optimized over 15 years. It can't simply be replaced by an off-the-shelf solution or rushed migration." The board members quickly realized how valuable what I had created was, and they leaned forward. Finally, even Dylan appeared to see that my modest abilities had produced something extraordinary. I started working on repairing Kingline systems, after receiving unanimous board approval for my return, along with my new position, pay, and board seat. Although I purposefully guided the IT staff through every step to ensure knowledge transfer that ought to have occurred years ago, the process took less than an hour. There was a noticeable sense of relief as systems throughout the organization went back online. Drivers eventually got their route instructions, warehouse management announced that operations had resumed, and the communications channels were flooded with happy messages. A harsh lesson in technological debt and appropriate succession planning. The financial impact was significant but manageable. A lot changed in the following week. Dylan's office was moved to the executive floor next to me. Under my direct direction, the IT department was restructured with the goal of adequately documenting the system and educating several team members about its architecture. Most gratifyingly, the Vortex Solutions contract was renegotiated to work with my team rather than replacing us entirely, instead becoming a joint upgrade effort. Dylan kept a professional distance from me. We only spoke when it was absolutely essential. I discovered that I didn't mind that the sibling relationship was still broken. Family relationships were not as important as respect. The most significant change, particularly in a business setting, was brought about by my father. He finally saw what he had missed for years at our first weekly coffee date since I returned. "I always thought Dylan would lead King because he reminds me of myself," he said. The confirmation felt wonderful, but I knew it was no longer required. "But the truth is, you're the one who's truly innovated, who's built something from nothing. I was wrong not to see that sooner." The crisis had unquestionably demonstrated my value to the board, our staff, and, above all, to myself. That Friday, I received my new business cards from Vanessa King, a board member and chief technology officer. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction when I looked at them, one that was more about getting the credit I deserved than it was about seeking retribution. I thought about how wonderful success tasted when it came from sticking to your principles, rather than putting others down when the dust settled and things resumed as usual. I only had to wait for the gap I left behind to open up and show its full extent. I hadn't needed to ruin anything.